We spent a fair amount of time on the show recently talking about the Democrat Party's struggles with men, especially white men. I've made my point pretty clear on that topic, but now we have something that proves my point so profoundly that I have no choice but to revisit the subject. Mike Nellis is a former advisor to Kamala Harris, one of the founders of the White Dudes for Harris organization. And on Twitter this week, Mike posted a lengthy analysis and attempted diagnosis of the Democrat Party's man problem. His analysis and the comments in response to it really tell you everything you need to know, but not in the way that they intended. Now, Mike Nellis's post is long. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I'll read a sizable chunk of it just so you get a sense of where he's going with this. So this is what he says, quote, I've seen a lot of questions about why white men, especially young white men, seem so angry, distrustful of the Democrat Party, or drawn to MAGA-ism. I've been studying this issue for a while now, and I wanted to share some thoughts. If we don't want to make inroads with white dudes, we need to understand what's happening. First, economic opportunities are shrinking. Young men are struggling with stagnant jobs, stagnant wages, fewer job prospects, making it harder for them to gain independence, start families, or even feel secure in adulthood. That instability makes many susceptible to the MAGA whirlpool. Second, there's a major education gap. Fewer men are graduating from college compared to women, which has serious consequences for their long-term economic and social stability. Kamala Harris is doing well with educated white men, but not with those who didn't finish college. Third, we're facing a mental health and social isolation crisis. Young men are lonelier and struggling with mental health issues at higher rates, partly fueled by social media and the erosion of traditional community institutions. Fourth, there's an identity crisis. Gender roles and societal expectations are shifting, which is a good thing, he says. And young men are left wondering where they fit in. Without positive role models, many gravitate toward toxic figures like Donald Trump because at least someone's speaking to their frustrations, however inartfully. Fifth, forming relationships, especially romantic ones, has become harder. Lastly, there's a deep cynicism and lack of trust in institutions. Many young men no longer believe the American dream is for them or that they have a place in society that's rapidly changing. We can't keep acting like white men don't have real issues. Everyone is suffering from something, and everyone deserves to have that suffering addressed by their government. Okay, now he goes into detail on all of those points, but that's the summary. And he isn't necessarily fundamentally wrong about any of the individual points that he raises. Yes, it's true. I mean, he's wrong about a lot of what you heard there, but like the initial point, the initial bullet point item, there's truth there. So it's true that men are struggling in this economy. It's true that there's an education gap. It's true that men suffer from loneliness and social isolation. All of that is true. But he's missing a couple of key components. First of all, and most importantly, the why. Okay, so this white dude for Harris is in better shape than most of his leftist counterparts because at least he notices and is willing to acknowledge the hardships that men face. His analysis of the situation seems to go a few steps beyond simply declaring that all men are scum who should be violently eradicated from Earth. And for that reason alone, he already qualifies as the wisest and most insightful Democrat in the country. He's basically Thomas Aquinas by modern Democratic standards, and yet still, he isn't even close to the point because he doesn't know why any of this is happening. There isn't much use in noticing a problem if you don't know why that problem is occurring. If you're driving along and you hear your engine clanging like a church bell, the next step is to take it to a mechanic and to find out why it's making that sound. If you never take the next step, if you never get the problem correctly diagnosed, then you'll be just as screwed as someone who was blissfully unaware of the problem to begin with. So yes, there is an education gap. Women are doing better than men in the education system. Why? Well, because the modern education system is built for girls. It is a system that from the youngest ages requires kids to sit calmly at desks for hours a day in classes with dozens of other kids, memorize information, and regurgitate it. This is an environment and a style of education that is better suited for girls, which is why boys are more likely to be diagnosed as mentally disordered and slapped with the ADHD label or some other label and sort of drugged into submission. It's true that men are increasingly socially isolated. Why? Well, because every all-male space in society has been abolished or feminized, which is the same thing as abolishing it. You know, women demanded to be included in everything, in every space, in every boys' club, which means that now there are no more boys' clubs. Even the Boy Scouts is not a boys' club anymore. Even the NFL increasingly caters to women. When you watch football on Sundays, I mean, this is a relatively small example, but every, not just it's not just that they're cutting to Taylor Swift constantly when you're watching it and they're doing, but like every commercial that you watch on TV where they're portraying football fans, it's all, they have women. It's like, you know, they want to, it's a commercial for whatever and for chips or something. And they want to show like your classic football fan. And it's a middle-aged white woman, you know, sitting on the couch, eating the chips and watching the game. And it's like, this is not, yes, there are middle-aged white women who sit on the couch and watch games, but still, this is not actually your classic, that's not really your audience. But they're insisting on it. Like they want to feminize everything. There is nowhere for men to go anymore for fraternity and male bonding. Those places have all been, all of them have been systematically and deliberately eliminated because, in particular, liberal women have said, we want to be involved in everything. We have to be involved in everything. We will not butt out of anything at all. Everything is about us all the time. Okay? That's what happened. It's true that many men are feeling demoralized and angry. Why is that? Well, because our culture intentionally demoralizes them and alienates them and demonizes them. White men in particular have been labeled the villains of history. No group appreciates being scapegoated as the bad guys. White men have tolerated it about as much as you could expect anyone to tolerate it. We've tolerated it far too much, in fact, for far too long. If anything, the real mystery isn't why so few white men vote Democrat, but why any white men would vote Democrat at all. Now, Mike misses these points, and he misses something else too. He's trying to explain why men tend to vote Republican, but never once in his long essay does he ever mention or even consider the possibility that men vote Republican because they happen to agree with the Republican platform, or at least they agree with it more than they agree with the Democrat platform. All of the stuff about men struggling and being demoralized is true, but that's not the primary reason why men vote Democrat. The primary reason is that most men just don't agree with Democrat policies. Now, Mike treats us like we're all a bunch of wayward, lost souls who are hurting and angry and just need someone to give us a hug. Now, that's maybe an improvement over the way the Democrats usually talk about us. Maybe an improvement, but I'm not even sure about that. But it's still not true. I don't want a hug from anyone but my wife and kids. I certainly don't want one from a white dude for Harris. As a man, I support Trump because I agree much more with Trump than I do with Kamala Harris. In fact, I disagree with Kamala Harris on literally every point about literally everything. So do most men. That's why we won't vote for her. Men, especially white men, but not only white men, tend to value national sovereignty, law and order, economic freedom, and so on. The Democrat Party stands against all those things, so we don't support them. We aren't lost and confused. Quite the contrary. We know exactly what we believe, and we vote for what we believe. So take me, for example. I'm a man. I support Trump, and yet I don't personally feel isolated or lonely, even though many men do, but I'm blessed because I have a wife and kids and a family that I love, and so I don't have that. I'm not walking around depressed and all that. I didn't go to college, so I guess I technically do count towards the education gap statistic, but I'm also more financially successful than the vast majority of college grads. So I don't even necessarily fit into all that stuff. And yet I'm not going to vote for Kamala. Why? Well, because I have a brain and I have a value system, and both of those things preclude me voting for Kamala. That's why. And this possibility just like doesn't factor in to Mike's analysis at all. And yet his analysis is still the closest to the point that you'll ever see anyone on the left get, which shows just how far away from the point they really are. Case in point, the comments under Mike's post, mostly from his fellow liberals, largely disagree with his points, but not for the reasons that I've outlined, but because he's being too sympathetic to white men. So here's one representative example. This is from a woman named Melissa. Here's what she says. I must admit, I cringed reading most of this. I feel that one thing you didn't address is the systemic entitlement bestowed upon white men in the U.S. That sense of entitlement, that privilege that they felt for eternity, is eroding. And they don't know how to deal with their feelings, which takes us to your point about mental health. Additionally, these issues have plagued men of every race except white men in the U.S. for eternity. I agree that we need to stop ignoring the issues and find ways to face it and attempt to repair it. Unfortunately, I don't know that sending people that MAGA already hates to do Fox interviews is really going to sway the needle on absolutely anything. Okay. So Mike wants to know why Democrats are losing the male vote. Well, here it is. Melissa is why. I mean, not her specifically, but her worldview and everything that it represents. I mean, that's why. She cannot bear to have someone on her own side, even in one Twitter post, just briefly, for a few paragraphs, show anything but contempt for white men. An expression of something other than contempt for white men makes her cringe. Empathy towards this whole group of people makes her cringe. She's sickened by it. Okay? And she represents the majority view on her side. Certainly she represents the majority view of the Democratic base, which increasingly consists of bitter feminists and nobody else. That's the problem that Mike is trying to grapple with, but he can't actually grapple with it. He can't grapple with it because, like, what he needs to say is to the feminists like Melissa, like, pipe down, okay? But will you just cut it out for 5 seconds so we can try to win some votes over here? That's what he needs to say to the Melissas of his party, but he can't. He cannot say that. He'll never say it. You can't tell the feminists to pipe down in the Democrat Party because they are the Democrat Party. And Mike can't see that, or if he does, he can't say it. So he's close to the point, but a million miles away from it at the same time. And that is why he is ultimately still today, I must say, canceled. If you'd like to see what else I have to say, you can access my full show by going to dailywire.com or by going to the Matt Walsh Show Twitter page. Hope to see you there. Godspeed.